Hey everyone, dragonrider here, getting ready for Druid, and I feel like Druid is losing some key stuff in rotation, so really kind of interested to see what decks are going to kind of come around and be popular after rotation and with this Festival of Legends expansion. So going to be jumping in with my Theorycrafted deck first here for Druid, and this one kind of went really in an odd direction. I did not go an aggressive deck. I actually tried to build something that kind of has a little bit more synergy. I'm topping it out at Ragnaros because Ragnaros is back in core, and I love this card. I think it's amazing. It's so much fun. I hope to close out games with this. I considered using the Alexstrasza as a kind of finisher instead, so maybe that's something that I switch out, but Ragnaros is fun. It's just super fun. I like that. The upside for Alexstrasza is that I can target face to try to close out the game. Ragnaros maybe will hit face, and if there's minions on the board, maybe not. But the goal of this deck that I put together is to use things like this Topior, the Shrubagazor, ridiculous name, along with nature spells to generate a bunch of 3/3 rushers, and ideally you're going to be clearing the board. So my kind of goal is to get Topior down and then play some nature spells and then play Ragnaros like on the same turn as a couple of cheap nature spells and be able to clear the board, and then Rag can go face. That's kind of the hope. That's the big top end dream. But let me walk through some of this as well. Nature spells, you have Planted Evidence. Discovering and costing 2 less this turn is huge, especially something like this after you've played Shrubagazor, really good value. This against an aggressive deck could just give you a tool that you might need to try to clear up some of their minions and try to survive a little bit longer to get to some of the Shrubagazor synergies. I kind of like Neophyte, Cult Neophyte coming back in the core set as well here. Just as a minion to play, you still kind of want to curve. I'm still going to play some things like the Wild Growth and Nourishes, but I kind of like having the option of Neophytes to put something on the board potentially, or if I'm just, maybe I draw this and I didn't find the ramp stuff, then this can hopefully slow some of my opponent's decks down a little bit to, again, keep the game going to get to that later game stuff. Talking about the nature spells again, you have Planted Evidence, the Natural Causes dealing 2 damage. This is also great because Natural Causes, it's 2 mana, but you can target this wherever you want. So this could go face if you want. If you're against an aggressive deck, you could target and then get something on board. The Solar Eclipses also coming back into core. These are nature spells. They're cheap. And the next spell you cast costs twice. I chose this and did not include the Lunar Eclipse in this variant because Lunar Eclipse is an arcane spell and not a nature spell. But also dealing 3 damage to a minion and then making your next thing cost 2 less maybe is something I want to do. But also I'm hoping that some of these other things that I have with these spells, some of the spells that I have generate minions, some of the things create their own minions. And obviously if I've already gotten to the point of playing Topior, I can just play a nature spell and get a 3/3 rush, so I can deal 3 damage to a minion anyways. So that one I decided to not include Plot of Sin. This one I originally had 2, and then I only went down to 1. But because I was worried about the infuse effect with not really running as many minions, this one debatable, but getting a couple of bodies, if I infuse it, they're bigger bodies. Again, this could, create 3/3 rushers from Topior because it's nature. It also could just put out a couple of bodies if I need it against a more aggressive deck. The new legendary Rhythm and Roots. I am so interested with this one. I don't think it's like super great, but it is also a nature spell. So if you play this after Topior, you get a 3/3 rusher. But again, it just kind of creates some minions. So I tried to stack this deck with a lot of spells that generate minions, so that I didn't have to play minions necessarily in the deck, or not a lot of minions. And then kind of in that same vein here, the weapon, the tambourine, summoning some minions, and I'm going to be playing spells that cost 5 or more. There's quite a few in here. All the nourishes, 1 copy of Flipper Friends. There is the 2 copies of Drum Circle, 2 copies of Miracle Growth. That's a lot of heavy spells. Plus, I could potentially discover something from like the Planted Evidence, or just generate something at some point. So that seemed like I could actually get value off of the tambourine, potentially, even if it's just 2 or 3 5/5s. But playing a 5-cost spell, going to be a little bit easier to do than the Plot of Sin infusing. So I figured that, why not? I could try it out. It's only 1 anyways of the Rhythm and Roots. And then, the tambourine. Okay, I could get some attack value at least. Plus maybe, hero power along with it and help clear some things. Again, the Flipper Friends. Now, this might be one where I try to get some of that infuse value, but only 1 Plot of Sin, only 1 Flipper Friends might not be the greatest. Added Queen Ajara because I figured, hey, I'm probably going to be playing some spells. This could allow me a little bit of flexibility at some point, play some spells, play Queen Ajara. I can either go for a big minion with the horn and find a colossal. I could just pick that weapon and play some other spells and deal damage to the enemy hero. There just is a bit of flexibility there with Queen Ajara, so I'm going to try that out. And then, of course, you got to have the Summer Flower Child, drawing cards that cost 6 or more, and if it's a finale, they cost 1 less. I mean, you can draw the Drum Circles, you can draw Topior, you can draw the Miracle Growth, you can draw Ragnaros. So that seems pretty sweet. Drawing something that's 7 creates that to cost 6 if you were to play this on curve, and then you have a really smooth turn 5, turn 6, turn 7 potentially. And of course, things like the Miracle Growth and the Nourish can also help with draw to just kind of dig through the deck. I just tried to create something that I think is a little bit flexible. And personally, with things like the Guff and Questline rotating, I think Topior is a very good kind of filler for those. I do think a Nubarak and some stuff might still see play, but also with Bran leaving core, the Bran and a Nubarak and Astalor really isn't a thing now with this rotation. So kind of leaning into the Topior aspect. And now to switch over and look at the community submitted deck. This is from Flying Kraken. So thank you so much for submitting this. I believe Kraken has recently hit, it's either over 9,000 or 10,000 Druid wins. So I was super excited when I saw that he wanted to submit some Druid stuff. Like, yes, I want to see what you have to offer here. So he did submit 2, looks like similar variations of this deck, kind of different top ends. But I thought this one was really, really interesting. So let's look at this here. It's kind of a very different deck than the one I put together. Now, this one uses things like the aquatic form to dredge. You still have innervates. Those are kind of classic Druid. But this leans into some of these new cards as well, like this Free Spirit, the Peaceful Piper to be drawing some stuff, the Groovy Cat. So this package of increasing your hero power to really build these up. You have the Rake, of course, you can use a buffed up hero power, then the Rake, and really be able to clear up some potentially large minions. Adding in the Harmonic Mood here. I love this card so much. It's fantastic. But also utilizing 1 solar eclipse, where my deck had 2, and then 2 lunar eclipses. So really kind of leaning into making some of this stuff pretty cheap. And a little bit of damage dealing and clearing up enemy minions with some of this effects as well. Of course, still leaning into wild growth. Now, this rest of the deck is very, very interesting to me. Spread the word, drawing 2 cards, and it's going to cost less for each attack that the hero has. Seems pretty reasonable with things like the Rake and the Groovy Cat. All are going to make the spread the word very cheap. So some very cheap drawing 2 things seems good. The top end of this, Summer Flower Child, which I mentioned in mine, but 2 copies of Summer Flower Child, and actually only 2 cards that cost 6 or more, because the other one, Tony, is 5 as well. So Anubarak and Jailer are the only 2 things in the deck that cost 6 or more. But making those cheaper, pretty good. Anubarak, I'm pretty decent. But I think this is very, very interesting. And I also want to mention this due process. For the rest of the game, players draw an extra card at the start of their turn. This deck is going to like turbo draw, and it's going to be very interesting to seeing this kind of turbo draw style deck getting to kind of the end, the fatigue game, and then playing this Jailer where your minions are immune. You're going to potentially be fatiguing, but you have these potentially large minions or just multiple minions that your opponent might really struggle with answering because they are immune. So that seems pretty interesting. I also like the potential combo or the potential interaction of maybe kind of turbo drawing through the deck a bit, getting the Jailer, and then playing Tony after you've drawn through your whole deck. Playing Tony, switching those decks, and then your opponent just is starting to draw fatigue. Very, very interesting kind of potential interaction there with just kind of the due process, the Summer Flower Child drawing a couple of those and just trying to quickly draw through the deck and kind of use that switching the decks as a win condition. And if your opponent kills the Tony and switches the deck back, I mean, Jailer and some Anubarak, some other minions might be a bit of a struggle for some decks to answer. The kind of interesting thing that I think about this is even though there is some pretty cool potential with the deck, I do worry about maybe its consistency or trying to find some of this stuff. And even if it does, will it have enough like survivability to last until it draws all of the stuff? Just looking at it, that feels like my concern here. Yeah, if you can curve out, really well with Peaceful Piper or Free Spirit on turn 1 into like Plating, Due Process, or Groovy Cat, something like that on turn 2. The Groovy Cat is the only beast in the deck, so the Peaceful Piper going to draw those Groovy Cats. If you already draw those before, you can at least play the Peaceful Piper to discover something. So there definitely seems to be some use for all of these cards, even if it ends up being later game, which is very, very interesting. So I don't know. This is a really interesting deck. Again, I feel like I keep saying interesting, but like this is, again, not a style of deck that I personally would play or that I typically like to kind of Theorycraft. There might be something here. I'm very, very interested to see, and especially with trying to kind of come to a fatigue Tony plan is very interesting. That's not how I would have envisioned Tony being used. I kind of think that people would want to play this really slow control decks or put Tony in the band for ETC where, you play ETC and then if it's not a game where you want to switch the decks, fine, you pick something else. So using it in this fashion, very interesting. It's kind of a sneaky way to use it. Definitely a very different direction for Druid. I also am kind of interested to see if there is some sort of like aggressive style of Druid deck. So maybe maybe you all have some idea for a druid deck that you might want to see, maybe some sort of aggressive deck, some sort of maybe aggressive menagerie style deck. I don't know. I would love to hear about it. If you do, let me know in the comments below. And thank you to everybody who has submitted decks. I love seeing these, but if you haven't already, go ahead and check out this video where I went through Demon Hunter, and I'll see you in the next one.